but the discussion wants to be about imagination and about craftsmanship and about their value for contemporary design. So India, thank you for taking the time for being here. I want to start with the choices you made for those rooms at Homo Faber, because, and then we were going to look more at craftsmanship in general and some of your recent work. We also have some images of that, etc. But one thing that, that strikes me is that you, first of all, you call these rooms follies. Why follies? Let's start from there.
Okay, no, this works. Hello, everybody. Thank you for being here. So, you know, when I was asked to do, when Homo Faber approached me and said, you know, we would like you to curate this room, which is, you know, craftsmanship in interior design and architecture, you start thinking, you know, I saw the Ladure Tea Room, which is a very large room that has a lot of features that are not easy to, it's a difficult space, in fact. So you start thinking, how can I show what's happening in interior design and architecture? Should I show a whole bunch of different samples of floors? Should I show what you can do with a wall? What can you do with a window? What you can do with a ceiling? How do you actually, what is the perspective that I'm gonna, how would I show things? And suddenly I thought, maybe if Alberto Cavalli came to see me is because maybe I have a personal view, and maybe that's what is interesting, to show my personal view, how I use my materials in a space that I would create. And what is really interesting for me is how craftsmanship can serve an imaginary, how it serves your imagination. So you imagine a space, and then you start thinking how you're going to build it, who you're going to build it with, which hand, which material, which know-how you're going to put in space. So in order to do that, to express the imagination and express this, we decided to create follies. In the beginning, we had more than 2, we had 4.
4, yes.
And then we simplified, and we came down to 2. So these 2 follies are self-supporting structures, which are like, it's more about an experience. The 2 structures are very different.
We want to see them, but keep going.
They're very different in shape, in colors, in textures, and suddenly having those 2 that are so contrary. One is in rattan, a black and white floor, where color is used with texture only, and the other circular one is really in color and upholstery and very soft.
So let's see them. Let's see them. The first one is...
Where do you see them?
You see them on the screen there in the front, if this works. Yes?
Yeah.
This is one of them. It's actually a space, an homage to the painter Henri Rousseau.
Yes, it's
maybe you can describe it and tell us how you came to this.
Yes. Henri Rousseau, for me, is a painter that touches me very much, because his world, he never traveled in reality, and it's all about his own imagination of tropical forests, of a scale. It's full of poetry also. And it's not the first time that I've used his work to kind of do sort of an abstraction of a room, this is an abstraction. For instance, there's no real function in this room. It's really about an experience. It's about an emotion. And it's really sort of an abstraction of a winter garden, for instance. You're kind of projected in a forest. And to do so, I used rattan. And what you can see here is this openness, the structure that's open on one side and sort of mirrored on the other side, and which reflects this forest effect. And of course, a black and white floor, which is kind of a graphic that sits the whole structure on the floor. And really, if there's something that was so important for me, is that is suddenly throughout this exhibition is to bring, first of all, different scale to the exhibition. Secondly is you see a lot of know-hows, a lot of making, and suddenly I wanted to show when something is completely finished and maybe you can experience it in a different way, and you maybe feel some kind of emotion.
Let's talk about rattan. So here is a detail, I think, of the same room. Let's talk about rattan because it's an interesting material. It's a material that's relatively abundant. It's often considered cheap and uninteresting, and that's why it's not really considered for serious work, let's say like that. This room seems to me a sort of statement on the nobility and versatility of rattan.
You're right. Rattan was a material that was used a lot in the 70s. Yeah. And sort of went out of fashion in the 80s because it was connected with very inexpensive furniture, etc. I've personally been working with rattan for about 10 years now, and I kind of would like to say that I was one of the first ones who started reusing the rattan. But I not only use it making furniture, I've been using it, I wanted to give it its nobility back. And I've been using it like wood. I've been using it, this is marquetry of rattan. Why do I like rattan? It's a very rich material. It's a very warm material. It expresses for me not one South, but all the Souths. The South, you find it around the Mediterranean, of course, but you find it in the Oriental countries, some of the Oriental countries. You find it in Iran, you find it in Lebanon. You know, and of course, it's a very sustainable material today. And I think that's an important part of
feature,
it.
Yes.
Yeah.
There are not many artisans who still work with rattan. You have collaborated for years with the same ones who did this,
yes,
which are from Valencia, Spain.
Yes.
But they seem mostly to disappear. They're among the last few in Europe.
Exactly. Rattan Deco is in Spain, in the south of Spain, near Valencia. And they were telling me that they used to have 10, 20 factories, and after year, these little, the artisans' places more than factories, but they all disappeared. And they're the only remaining one. And, to be able to survive, they have to do other work. So they do woodwork at the same time. And so I'm very proud to be working with them because they're really fantastic. And, they have never worked with rattan in this way. So every time I send them a drawing, they panic. They say, no, we've never done this. And then they say, well, let me try. And then we push them, and then we go and see them, and then they finally make it. And then, so they did the whole structure. And then this summer, before the summer, I was at the Villa Noailles in the south of France, and there was a show, and I met François Pasolunghi, who's the only rattan maker in France, I believe, and he's based in Nice. And I loved his work, and I told him, I would like to make these masks. I have this idea, so I don't know if you saw in the room, there's like pecans and there's a tiger, to express the Henri Rousseau jungle. And he said, yeah, of course, I'll do them. I'll do them over the summer. I'm not going to take any holiday. He's here somewhere around. He came to see the show. But so then I worked with both of them.
So before we move to our next room, I want to mention that the floor mosaic is actually the work of students from the School of Spilimbergo, right?
Yeah. So that's an interesting story also, because it was when I made this image, I said, well, with the floor, maybe I would usually use stone, no? And so Alberto said,
Alberto Cavalli. Yeah.
Alberto Cavalli, he's right here. We should thank him. He said, maybe we should use some, something from Venice. I said, yeah, great idea. So we tried to think about the terrazzo, which I use and I love very much. But terrazzo at this scale doesn't really work, because I think terrazzo is really impressive when it kind of goes on a large surface. So Alberto introduced me to the School of Mosaic, which is an hour away, I believe. And I was in contact with Gian Piero, who's fantastic. And they sent me samples, and over the conversation with them, I said, well, what if we mixed it with slabs of stone so we can see the effect of the mosaic versus the stone? And they were very pleased. So we had 20 students work over a whole month to make the floor. And I really, I had no, I mean, I had a bit of an idea, but I think that the result is fantastic because you feel like walking on water. You know, this effect of shininess, which is lovely.
Talking of water, there is an element of kind of waves in, I'm trying to get to the next picture here, in the other room, which is called merry-go-round, because it's round.
Yeah.
And it has a completely different set of materials and of colors.
Exactly. So I really wanted to contrast the two
spaces, yeah.
the two places, the two pavilions, so they can really express that imaginary. And I think that was super important for me because that's what I was trying to say. So this room, merry-go-round, is about color and texture, meaning, so it's this big banquette. It's like a boudoir, contemporary boudoir that has no real function, in fact. And every color is repeated on 4 different materials. So it goes from cotton, satin, to velvet, to ceramic, and to wool with the carpet. And I think the relation of the materials are super interesting. The banquette itself was made in Italy, also thanks to Alberto Cavalli, who found me an artisan called Venice in Milano, who did a fantastic job. And once more in this merry-go-round, I didn't know, maybe you could be underwater, in fact, maybe you're above water, maybe you don't really know where you are. But so that's why you have a bit of fish coming to say hello to you. The fish were embroidered by the Maison de Gournay, which is based in London. And really those artisans, once more, I gave them total freedom to do what they wanted. I just said, I want the fish to have a movement. They all have to be different. Go ahead. And they sent me samples, and that's how we moved along.
So rattan makers and the students that do the mosaics and upholsterers and carpet makers, embroiderers, what is your relationship to, in general, to craft people as a designer?
Well,
who influences who?
It goes both ways, really, because I've been working in France. My company's been set in France for about 20 years. And as you might know, France is a country of know-hows, of artisans. There's no real industry. And I work in interior design, but I work in furniture, and I work with products as well, design products. And in reality, so I've been working with artisans for the past 20 years, and I adapt my design to what I know they will be able to do, right? So I know more or less their limits. Sometimes I can push them further.
Like the example before with the rattan makers in Spain.
Exactly.
Yes.
But you know, if I prefer having a product of quality that because I know they can do it. Of course, if I worked with the Italian industrials, I wouldn't design necessarily the same way. I wouldn't be, right now, because they're all scattered in France, you don't necessarily mix so many materials together because it's complicated. But I usually visit, for instance, upholsterers is something that I do the whole time, is I go out there, I work with them, they make samples for me, they come back. And that's the way I have to work. I mean, there's no other way, because sometimes you're attracted to a piece of material, you're attracted to, you see something in the atelier that kind of catches your eyes and it gives you an idea, and so it's really both ways.
So you've created 2 spaces, and often we don't really think about space other than it's just there. It's kind of a given. But the message you're trying to convey here is actually spaces are imagined. They are designed with a specific vision in mind.
Yes, that's right. And I think that one can go a lot further using these know-hows, because that's going to make the specificity and the unicity of a space is actually how you use your materials, how you work with the craftsmanship. I think that this room, the rattan room, for instance, you can totally imagine it in a hall, in a dining room even, and it just gives you such a unique feel.
Mm-hmm. Which brings us to another topic, and is color. You've been called the virtuoso of color, the reigning queen of color. Those are not undeserved labels, by the way. And as you've seen with this room, you're not afraid of bold colors, no. Clearly. I saw a quote of you saying, color is the best way to bring sunshine into a space.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. You know, I grew up in the United States in the mid-'60s, and my first memories are in Technicolor. So I remember color TV when I was, 3, 4, and it was about Tex Avery, and it was Bugs Bunny, and it was all these colors that came to me and made so much sense. And I think, first of all, you're always connected to your childhood somehow, to those pop and saturated colors. And also being from I'm a girl from the South, I don't know which one anymore, but my mother's Egyptian, my father was Iranian, I grew up a bit everywhere. And I think that in those countries, people are not scared of colors just because the sun kills a lot of colors. So for me, color is really related to the light. And actually, when you go really up north, I was in Sweden this winter, and the colors, they're not so much colors. It's kind of a very different grays, and and the more you go down, the more sunshine you have. And I also mix it often with black and white because it gives it's like shadows. It gives that kind of depth to it.
So there's another quote, I hope it's a real quote of yours, because it says this: I like to mix color and let them insult each other.
Yes,
I
that's
let
true.
them have an argument.
Yeah, true.
End of quote.
Yeah.
That cannot happen with blend colors. You can only happen with strong colors.
It happens in strong colors. So what I'm saying with that is that I often like colors to be off, and I'm not scared of having, some people say, oh no, this color doesn't go with that. And I like that when they get angry with each other, because that's when a conversation starts, no? Yeah.
So you have a reputation for being a perfectionist, bordering on obsessive about the exact shade of color for every single piece of your work. For most people, for me, pink is pink. For you, pink is 50 different shades of pink, and you want the 37th and on the 38th to be there.
Well, that's an exaggeration. What's difficult? I tell you what, people refer to that because I did one restaurant that's very well known that's called Sketch.
Which we'll see a picture of in a moment.
And, when you decide to do a room this size, totally in pink, the walls, the ceiling, and everything, you kind of freak out because it's never been done. So you have to make sure that the pink is the right pink, because you choose it in your studio in Paris where you have daylight, and it's going to go in a restaurant where there's no daylight, so it's going to be only electric light, so it's going to alter the color. And then you have to match it with the leather and all these, so you have to be a bit precise.
So this is the restaurant. It's there for you, but it's there for them.
Yeah.
A Sketch in London. It is indeed completely pink. We will talk about social media later, but this is one of the most Instagrammed restaurants in the world.
Yeah.
And it also has copies, right? People have tried to copy it in Shanghai and elsewhere.
Recently I had 4 copies, and
yeah,
I don't know
exactly.
what to do with the whole thing. They copied the furniture, the walls, the art,
So describe a bit this room for us. Tell us, you're given a room to make a restaurant. tell us your process. Where do you start from and how do you end up with this?
You know, what I try to do with color is very contextual. Meaning when Mourad, the owner of the sketch, asked me to come and do this restaurant, you only see this room, but the whole space of sketch has 1, 2, 3, 4 restaurants contained in one building. And the whole building was it's very eclectic. Mourad likes to mix a whole bunch of things together. So it becomes visually quite disturbing, in fact, because it had all the same value. And when he told me, he said, by the way, this room is going to be a tiny job for you because it's all about the artist called David Shrigley, and he does his art. So it's kind of provocative and whimsical, and he wants his paintings all along the wall. You just have to do the furniture, and that's it. So I enter the room, and I kind of feel stifled with all this mix of vintage furniture and the colors, and I came in and I want freshness. So I told him, I will do this project for you, but it's going to be all pink. And he said, I don't like pink, but do whatever you want. So that's how we...
Okay, it's a good start.
Yeah, so we started like that, and then, I did this project in 2 months, so it had to go quickly. It was 2 months from the start to the end, and 1 week of installation. So, in that case, it's really like doing an installation. So you have to be radical. And being radical means, what do you want people to perceive? You want people to perceive the whimsical art, provocative, and all over pink. So it's like a modern brasserie where pink is treated in a very masculine way. And so I kind of like the opposition of using pink, which is supposed to be a girly color, in a very radical way. And that's why it worked so well. Suddenly it became, a total... And I must say that something that I didn't expect, that when you have dinner at Sketch, everybody looks so beautiful because you look as if you had a 3-day tan, just the perfect amount of right color, and all the women look beautiful, everybody looks beautiful.
Let's look at another project of yours, which is this one here, which is very recent. It's from last spring, I think, in Milan.
In Milano, yeah.
So you designed the banquettes and the tables for this club, which is called Scianina. It's within a gallery.
Scianina.
You didn't design what's on the walls.
Yes, I did design.
You did that too?
Yeah.
Okay.
I did the walls with de Gournay as well.
Okay, so here there is, talking about, colors insulting each other, here there are shapes fighting with each other.
Mm. Yeah. They got into a fight. I'm not responsible for it.
But tell us a little bit about the thinking behind this space.
So Nina is a woman who has a fantastic gallery in Milano called Nilufar. And so she has one gallery called Via della Spiga, and she has the Entrepôt, which is outside of Milan. And for me, she's like the queen of design in many ways because she mixes vintage with contemporary productions, and she's always one train ahead, or two maybe. And I've been working for her for about 10 years. I use her furniture in many of my projects, and she said, look, could you curate this space for me? It's on the first floor of her gallery. And she says, I'm dying to have I've always loved the idea of having a private club. So I said, yes, I will do the private club, but I'm going to call it Chez Nina, because she's called Nina Yachar. And this was an ode to really a nod to her, because she's always quite eccentric, and she's not scared of mixing colors, and so she was really the inspiration. It was like a portrait I did of her in 3 dimensions.
So that tells us about your process, because the other example, you start from the space, which has only the art in, and you can do the rest as you want. Yeah. Here you start from the person and the character of the person.
Exactly.
I have another example, and it is the Ladure Tea Room in Geneva,
yes.
Switzerland, which is also a very elaborate, symmetric space with colors that fight with each other. It's almost kind of a dream vision. What I want to hear from you is, what's your intention here? I mean, when you imagine people sitting there having tea and macaron, what should they feel according to your intention?
Okay, my intention, okay, once more, it's really about defining what you want to say, and that's how all of my projects start. Mm-hmm. What am I saying? You know, what is this about? So when Ladure came to see me, I really was thinking, well, Ladure, what is it? What is it all about? And I really thought maybe it's a garden of delights. So when you start with a sentence like that, you say, what is a garden? A garden referring, because they were a lot about Marie Antoinette. They have this classic French feel with Marie Antoinette. And when you look at the gardens in Versailles, you always have these trestles, mm-hmm. les treilllages.
Treillage, yeah.
Yeah. And so I said, if it's a garden, we're going to use these trestles and maybe have a bright color behind and work around everything that will remind you of a garden where the fruits of the garden are delights. So the lights look like meringues, the tables are like sugar canes. Everything speaks about candy and sweets and delights. It's an abstraction of that as well.
This is actually another part of that, but yeah. I want to show the next one, which is this, and is the store side, yeah. which is, being Ladure, is full of delights, of course.
Exactly.
This, by the way, is an image that to me reminds of Wes Anderson's Grand Budapest Hotel kind of visuals,
yes,
right?
It's true that there's a connection, and I'm never, influenced by him in a mm-hmm. way. But I think that probably we do have similar references that are from childhood in a way, and also for me sometimes I imagine that my spaces can be drawn in a cartoon. So there's a simplification of a space, mm-hmm. and that makes it very accessible in a way and very comfortable.
Okay, but a lot of your spaces, of your projects, have to do with hospitality, with making people feel welcome in a space that's not theirs. Restaurants, clubs, small hotels, tea rooms, maybe big hotels someday. You go into a space that's not yours, it's not your home, but you need to feel welcome. How do you pursue that, making people feel welcome in your space?
Well, there's a question of comfort, first of all, and I think that's one of the things I work a lot on, which is modern comfort, and where, first of all, I work a lot on building the space itself and the flow. So, because just for you to know, I'm a trained architect, so I think that's an important part of my work that doesn't necessarily show, because people remember more the colors and the textures that I use than actually the work that has been put into the flow. So that really participates. But I think that one thing that I'm very careful with is not to overdo spaces. Because I want people to feel themselves. I don't want to impose something that I did. It has to show enough that you recognize that it's a space that has personality and has character, etc. But I don't want it to be overwhelming for people not, when you're sitting in a cafe and having lunch with a friend, you don't want to start thinking about who designed mm-hmm. the space. So yeah. It's really about being there but not being there. There's something that has to be giusto, I think.
Right. Do you think people react more to the colors or to the materials?
I think that people react to the senses. So I think today, because we spend a lot of time behind a screen, we have the need of using what defines a human being. That means all our senses. So I think people are attracted to color because, of course, but also to touch, also to taste, also to all the senses.
I want to end by talking a bit about social media, but before, let's see if anyone who has joined us here has a question for you. And if you do, just raise your hand and we're going to bring you a microphone. Any question for India?
No questions.
Doesn't seem to be the case. Alberto, you want to ask a question? Let's get a microphone here to Alberto, and then there is a gentleman behind also who has a question. Please.
I apologize, more than a question. I would just like to underline something that India hasn't mentioned, but which for myself and for Fabienne as curators of the event is interesting. India mentioned that this beautiful floor was done by the students of the Mosaic school. Actually, these students renounced to their summer holidays, and you know how we as Italians will love our summer holidays in August. And they gave up their summer holidays because they felt honored to have been chosen by someone like India and to be part of Homo Faber. So, and the same is for Mr. Virzi, for Vimas, actually, when I called and said, oh, you know, India has like one sofa, maybe two. How many are there? Like 8?
There are like 6 or 7. There are 6 pieces, and it was a huge amount of work for him because we didn't tell the story up to the end, but we had a bit of a change at the last minute, and it was and that's, you know, really thanks to Alberto, because he was super reactive to find not only people who could help me, but he found people who could actually, it was, you know, the happy accidents that happen, you know, because they actually enriched the project. And that happens quite often when you work, is that you don't expect, you can't control everything, because everything is just about human beings, and we all make mistakes, we all kind of expect the best. Sometimes you just don't get what you think you're going to get, and then suddenly things work out very differently, but for the better.
And in fact, this is what they have all appreciated. I mean, not because of this event, but because of the collaboration that they had with you. You have changed, in a way, their lives. It's a kind of a U-turn for them to say, I've worked for India, and this is what we have achieved. This is what you perfectly, India, embody what we kind of expect from all the architects, decorators, interior designers coming here. Acknowledge the value of the persons you work with.
Well, thank you very much, Alberto. That's very touching to hear that. I also think that the perception of mosaico is also sometimes used for very classic spaces. And suddenly working in a very contemporary space opened the possibilities of the use of a material like this. And this is the conversation that is great with craftsmanship and know-hows, is how you can actually project them in an everyday world, in your everyday life, because they add poetry, they add quality, and it really does make a difference.
Just for those who are watching online, I want to mention the gentleman who just spoke is Alberto Cavalli, the General Commissioner of Homo Faber. And there was another question just there behind. Yes?
I wanted to ask about if you could elaborate on Henri Rousseau. Why Henri Rousseau? So I came in a little late, so I'm sorry if I know you were already talking about it, but maybe if you could just say more. And I asked partly because I find it very complicated to relate to him. I know on one level, can you hear?
I'm not sure, we can hear, but I'm not sure if we understood what you are referring to. Sorry, can you repeat the question? Yeah, the microphone works. Don't worry.
Okay, so Henri Rousseau.
Henri Rousseau, yes.
The artist in the forest. I was just wondering if you could say a bit more about how you were drawn to his work. I asked partly because I get that it's, you know, childlike and it sparks the imagination, but I sometimes find him very hard to relate to, and I read somewhere that he may even have had like a developmental problem, and that's why he's kind of trapped in a very juvenile world. And so I kind of want to relate to it, but then I can't. So I was just wondering if you could say more about your personal relationship to it.
Well, you know, it's just a personal attraction. It's my own attraction to his work that made me, you know, I think that in the representation of a forest, of a tropical forest, I think his representation is the most not only imaginary, but also the most remarkable. And, you know, it's a sort of a far inspiration because it's not exact at all, just because everything we did is inspired from it, but very stylized. And even if you look in detail in the way these panels were made, because they're made in panels, sometimes we mirrored the panels and we've filled in, it's a relation between the emptiness and the full, which is something that I'm very close to as well. It's really a stylized version of Henri Rousseau more than a reproduction of anything that he's done. But I thought I would give him credit because it started that way. And yeah.
Thank you. There was another question here in the front. And then you have a question too, yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Could you give us a little more, tell us a little bit more about your process? Like, how do you approach a project? Do you start with a drawing? Do you directly go to materials? Do you go to the computer?
I don't go to the computer, forget that. I'm not good with computers, so no way, you can't get me there. You know, there's no rule. It can be many different things. And I think that's super important to know that. That there shouldn't be any rules of how you approach things, because sometimes it's just utter inspiration. Like I was speaking about my project at Sketch. I went there, I met the owner, and I saw pink, so it came like that. In some ways, I really, for instance, for Homo Faber, I really sat down and it started with writing. It started with trying to figure out what I wanted to say. And then, so once I defined what I wanted to say, so how should it take place? What it would be the strongest, because everything should go in the direction of what you want to say. So I said, well, if I want to speak about imagination, then it should be spaces that allow you to dream, and so they should be contained, and so maybe it's one shape, two shapes, three shapes, four shapes, and what are they about? And they should be about a material that I've always used, that I like using, that is part of my language, because that's what I know how to do the best. And then that might be a way. Sometimes I will listen to a space, because a space tells you so much. A lot of my projects are very contextual, because I listen to the space, to the location. I won't design a project the same way if it's in Paris or in the south of France or if it's abroad. But I tell you something else, I listen a lot to my clients and to what they want, what they expect from me, what they're looking for, because everybody's looking for something and that you can give them or you cannot give them. And when I do residential projects, I see these homes like portraits. You know, I'm not designing a home for myself. I'm designing a home for someone who's going to live in the spaces. So it's really trying to, like a photographer, when he takes a photo of a subject, of a person, the photo will look like the person, but with a vision, with a projection of the photographer. And so that's how I see my work in regards to residential work.
Another question there in the back.
So in the last project that you showed, you mentioned sort of a relationship between the architecture and the users, which was that you wanted the users to be able to focus on eating their food and not, worry too much about the architecture. But then in the first, I think, project that you showed with the pink room, that relationship is sort of different, because the pink sort of hits you and you see all the furniture and the interiors. So how would you sort of describe that relationship, and what are the goals there?
No, well, it's not exactly what I said. I really responded to a question that it's like, how far do you go and how do you define, because you were saying that I was kind of well known for these public spaces that I were doing, and how how is it that people feel comfortable in those spaces? And so the level of comfort for me is defined by this balance that you give between identifying a space and between not going too far. You know, it's really this balance where you don't want people to be eating with you around them, you know, because it's over the top, it's too much. But I didn't design this place in saying, oh, I don't want people to think, you know, you just do it as a limit. You limit yourself and how far you want to go. So, and that's part of the comfort. In Sketch, it was a very different context, because Sketch was designed for a very short time. It was a project that was supposed to last only 2 years. It's been so successful that it's been going on for 6 years now. Okay, and when you do something for 2 years, it's like an installation, and you can go wild in a way. And I don't think I would have done Pink if he had told me it was a longer project.
Any other question? Otherwise, I want to end on the question of social media, because you have like 150,000 followers on Instagram. And of course, you publish your own work, but you also snap pictures of things that inspire you. And my impression is that Instagram and other social media are kind of creating a sort of homogenized visual culture. Everybody snaps the same pictures with the same pose, at the same place, with the same framing. When you are in a homogeneous visual landscape, where do you go to find visual inspiration?
Well, you're right, it's a real problem. I think it's the whole world, Instagram is giving the whole world the same inspiration. You know, so it's a bit of a problem because everything is starting to look alike. And so you have to reinvent yourself. And that's what I try to do the whole time, is to find a new, not that I am so innovative myself, but I try to be. I try, actually, the pink, I was one of the first to do the pink. But what I try to do is really be very specific about the question I'm asking myself. So the result of that is really try to defining what I want to say. And I think once you have that as a rule, the answer you give is not only aesthetic. The aesthetic is justified by a purpose, answering a question, first of all. Second is, I travel a lot, you know, and what I publish on my Instagram is probably my own work most of all. Then with stories, I mostly do things I see in museums, and they fade away after, because I don't give out my sources in reality, just because it's too easy, but I prefer looking at books. I visit museums, I travel a lot, and sometimes, you know, I read, and you can't imagine, sometimes it's the slightest little things that give you inspiration. It can be the counter with a craftsmanship, it's many different things, it's not only one thing, but I completely agree that this is, Instagram is flattening everything.
So you made a half joke before about computers and screens, but the reality is the number one activity we all do during the day is interfacing with a screen.
Yes.
Of any kind, the phone, the computer, the television, the dashboard of the car, the ATM, everything, right? Do you think that that's changing our relationship to space in the way you analyze space?
Oh, absolutely. I think that it's not only changing the relation to space, but it's changing our lives, because if we look at things, you know, if you look at the trends in interior design, and also, let me do one thing after another. You'll see that texture has become, as I told you, color are becoming so much stronger. and we have because we need our senses to be.
It's also an antidote.
Exactly, but also human gatherings. You know, there's so many more conferences because human beings need to be together. They want direct interaction. I think restaurants, food, whatever is real and tactile is the contrary of the screen. So we're compensating in a way whatever is happening this amount of time, and myself, I'm doing it myself. My son here is saying that he doesn't want a smartphone anymore. He wants to be off the phone. He wants to go back to
Very wise young man. Very wise young man. India, we're going to end on this note with just an invitation for everybody to go and, of course, see the spaces you have created here at Homo Faber until
and I would like to,
September 30.
Yeah,
yes?
I would like to take a chance to thank Homo Faber for inviting me, for the Michelangelo Foundation, Alberto Cavalli, and, of course, the founders, and the fantastic team who put this together, because this is really a wonderful event for many reasons. Myself, I've been around several times and I'm still discovering things, so I think you really should take the time you need to go and look at details. But one of the things that's really amazing for someone like me is the sourcing, the amazing sourcing of the best craftsmanship in Europe, meeting people that you can eventually be working with. It's really very enriching. So I would like to thank the Michelangelo Foundation for inviting me. Thank you very much.
And we thank you for taking the time for this discussion. Thank you, India.
Thank you
very much.
Bye-bye.